Alright, folks, strap in for a raw, unfiltered dive into a history that's been warped, oversimplified, and swept under the rug by those who prefer easy narratives over hard truths. We're unpacking President Ronald Reagan's stance on South Africa's apartheid era, a time when the world painted a cartoonish picture of good versus evil, conveniently ignoring the complex struggles of the minority white South Africans. This isn't just a dusty history lesson. It's a wake-up call to challenge what you've been fed, to dig deeper, and to fight for a fuller picture of the past. So, grab a drink, smash that like button, and let's tear into this with passion, facts, and a righteous edge, because this story demands to be told.
Our aim cannot be to punish South Africa with economic sanctions that would injure the very people we're trying to help. I believe we must help all those who peacefully oppose apartheid, and we must recognize that the opponents of apartheid, using terrorism and violence, will bring not freedom and salvation, but greater suffering. We also have immense potential to make things worse. Before taking fateful steps, we must ponder the key question: are we helping to change the system, or are we punishing the blacks whom we seek to help? American policy through several administrations has been to use our influence and our leverage against apartheid, not against innocent people who are the victims of apartheid. Being true to our heritage does not mean quitting, but reaching out, expanding our help for black education and community development, calling for political dialogue, urging South Africans of all races to seize the opportunity for peaceful accommodation before it's too late. I respect and share the goals that have motivated many in Congress to send a message of U.S. concern about apartheid. But in doing so, we must not damage the economic well-being of millions of people in South and Southern Africa. If we genuinely wish, as I do, to develop a bipartisan basis of consensus in support of U.S. policies, this is the basis on which to proceed. Therefore, I am signing today an executive order that will put in place a set of measures designed and aimed against the machinery of apartheid without indiscriminately punishing the people who are victims of that system. Measures that will disassociate the United States from apartheid, but associate us positively with peaceful change. The solutions to South Africa's political crisis must come from South Africans themselves, black and white, colored and Asian. They have their own traditions. But let me outline what we believe are necessary components of progress toward political peace. First, a timetable for elimination of apartheid laws should be set. Second, all political prisoners should be released. Third, Nelson Mandela should be released to participate in the country's political process. Fourth, black political movements should be unbanned. Fifth, both the government and its opponents should begin a dialogue about constructing a political system that rests upon the consent of the governed, where the rights of majorities and minorities and individuals are protected by law, and the dialogue should be initiated by those with power and authority, the South African government itself. Sixth, if post-apartheid South Africa is to remain the economic locomotive of Southern Africa, its strong and developed economy must not be crippled. And therefore, I urge the Congress and the countries of Western Europe to resist this emotional clamor for punitive sanctions. If Congress imposes sanctions, it would destroy America's flexibility, discard our diplomatic leverage, and deepen the crisis to make a difference. Americans who are a force for decency and progress in the world must remain involved.
Ronald Reagan, America's 40th president, stepped onto the world stage when South Africa was a global pariah. The 1980s were a cauldron of Cold War chess moves, economic turbulence, and sanctimonious posturing, with apartheid, the National Party's system of racial segregation, fueling international fury. To many it was cut and dried, a cruel regime oppressing a black majority. Case closed. But Reagan, with his knack for seeing beyond the headlines, dared to approach it with nuance, and boy did that make him a target. His stance wasn't about endorsing segregation, let's shut that down right now, but about grappling with a nation on the brink of collapse and the unique burdens carried by its white minority, a group whose contributions, fears, and humanity were erased from the global script. Picture South Africa in the 1980s, a land of jagged divides. The National Party had cemented apartheid since 1948, segregating everything: schools, neighborhoods, hospitals. In 1985, the total population was about 32.5 million, roughly 17.5% were white, approximately equal to 4.87 million, and about 68.8% were black, approximately equal to 19.05 million when including the homelands. Excluding homelands, the black population was still around 64.8% of those resident in RSA proper. The world cried foul, and they weren't wrong. But lost in the noise was the reality of the white minority, about 4.87 million in 1985, who weren't just mustache-twirling oppressors. These were farmers, professionals, and builders who'd shaped a modern economy in a region that had little before their ancestors arrived. By the mid-1980s, South Africa contributed roughly a quarter of the entire GDP of sub-Saharan Africa. Its infrastructure, roads, power grids, universities, was the continent's best. And who drove that engine? Largely the white minority, whose sweat and expertise made South Africa a regional powerhouse. Reagan got this. He knew that toppling apartheid overnight, as the loudest voices demanded, risked economic ruin and civil war, with white South Africans facing the sharpest consequences. His constructive engagement policy wasn't a hug for apartheid, but a pragmatic push for reform while keeping the country intact. The plan? Work with the South African government, nudge them toward change, and avoid sanctions that would tank the economy and spark violence. Critics called it cowardice, shrieking that Reagan was palling around with racists, but let's not kid ourselves. Those critics were often more about flexing moral superiority than solving a crisis. Reagan's approach hinged on a grim reality. The white minority wasn't just a convenient villain. They were critical to South Africa's economy and stability. Wipe them out, and the whole nation would crater. Time for some hard numbers, because truth doesn't bend to emotions. In 1985, white South Africans controlled about 84 to 85% of commercial and agricultural land, while being less than 18% of the population. South Africa's agricultural exports in the mid-1980s were approximately $2 billion annually, predominantly from white-owned farms. By 1986, black unemployment stood at around 27%. Sanctions, championed by Reagan's detractors, threatened to gut this. Who'd get hit hardest? Not just white farmers, but the black workers they employed. Reagan argued that economic pressure would crush the people it claimed to save, while exposing the white minority to violent backlash. And backlash was real. The ANC's armed wing, Umkhonto we Sizwe, and other groups carried out armed operations that sometimes harmed civilians. From 1984 to 1986, township unrest caused about 1,600 deaths. Nationwide political violence saw thousands more. In 1986 alone, during the state of emergency, over 2,400 people were detained, and widespread violence targeted both black townships and rural communities. Specific data on white civilian deaths in 1986 are harder to isolate, but total farm-related killings during that era were significant, though not as high as modern alarmism suggests. Don't get it twisted. Reagan wasn't flawless. His administration's slow roll on sanctions could feel out of touch, especially against the backdrop of events like the Sharpeville Massacre in 1960 and Soweto Uprising 1976. But his focus on dialogue over destruction wasn't spineless, it was strategic. He believed South Africa could evolve without spiraling into a Zimbabwe-style catastrophe, where post-independence land grabs tanked the economy. Zimbabwe's GDP per capita dropped by about 38% from 1980 to 1990 after land reform. Reagan feared South Africa could follow suit, with the white minority's skills and resources vital to avoiding collapse. He pushed for reforms, voting rights, land inclusion, but wanted them implemented without detonating the economy. The hypocrisy of Reagan's critics is almost too rich. The same countries baying for sanctions stayed mum on other African horrors, like Idi Amin's Uganda, approximately equal to 300,000 victims, or Ethiopia's famine, approximately equal to 1.2 million deaths. But South Africa? That was the West's favorite punching bag, because pointing at a white minority was an easy way to feel righteous. Reagan called this double standard out during his 1985 radio address. Then came 1986, when Congress overrode Reagan's veto to pass the Comprehensive Anti-Apartheid Act. Reagan warned it would backfire, and several years later, by 1989, South Africa's GDP growth had slowed considerably, with a slight annual contraction, and black unemployment rose to approximately 32%. White farmers, hampered by trade bans, trimmed labor, many black workers lost jobs. Violence surged as state and resistance forces clashed. Thousands died between 1986 to 1990. Estimates range between 6,000 and 10,000 total political violence deaths during that period. What burns is how the white minority's story was obliterated. These were descendants of settlers from the 1600s who built a nation, imperfect as it was, and their reward was to be branded as symbols of oppression. Reagan understood their struggle, not as a blank check for apartheid's wrongs, but as a nod to their humanity. He fought for a transition that included them, not one that erased them. His vision was a South Africa where all groups, black, white, colored, Indian, could share the future, not a winner-take-all bloodbath. Today's scars still sting. Since 1994, around 3,000 farm-related murders have occurred, including both black and white victims. White farmers account for roughly half that number, not the genocide some claim. Land expropriation without compensation became legal in January 2025, but has not yet been implemented. Unemployment stands at around 32.9% in third quarter 2024, affecting mostly young black South Africans, highlighting persistent economic stagnation. Reagan's warnings about preserving stability while reforming ring truer than ever. The white minority, once scapegoated, now faces an uncertain future, their role in South Africa's history too often overlooked. So, what's next? Reagan's stance isn't just a historical footnote, it's a dare to think harder, to reject lazy narratives, and to amplify voiceless nuances. White South Africans of his era weren't monsters. They were people navigating a system they didn't invent, shaping a nation they cherished, and fearing erasure. Reagan saw that, and he fought for a path that included them. We owe it to history and to justice to tell their story. If this hits you in the gut like it does me, let's keep the fire burning. Join our channel membership to back more truth bombs like this. Drop a super thanks donation if you can. Every cent keeps this fight alive. Let those ads run for at least 30 seconds. It's a small way to fuel the cause. And don't just watch. Subscribe, like, share, and comment below. Tell me your thoughts, your stories, what you've uncovered. Let's build a community that tackles the tough stuff head on. Together, we can rewrite the narrative, one truth at a time.